Please make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Before I married Jonathan Mark, I believed love conquered all. Even contracts. Even cold legal documents disguised as precautions. When he slid that prenup across the table with a warm smile and a trembling hand, I signed it without hesitation. After all, I had nothing to lose and everything to gain: his heart, his promises, our future. Or so I thought. But love isn't always what it seems. Sometimes, it's laced with secrets. With generational legacies. With silent power plays wrapped in wealth. 2 weeks after our wedding, his billionaire father, David Mark, was gone. The funeral was tense. Opulent. Hollow. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment the lawyer read the will. He left everything to me. Not to Jonathan. Not to the other Mark heirs. To me, the woman who had signed away any claim to the family's fortune just months before. The silence in that room could have cut diamonds. That's when I realized, I had no idea who I'd married, or why he'd really married me. And that was only the beginning. The sun poured golden light across the rooftop restaurant in Manhattan where Jonathan had proposed to me. He looked like a dream in that tailored navy suit, down on one knee with a ring that sparkled brighter than the skyline behind him. Of course, I said yes. What woman wouldn't? We met just 8 months earlier, at a fundraiser I had no business being at. I was an event coordinator on the lower end of the team. He was there with his father, David Mark, the David Mark, founder of the $1 trillion Mark Innovations and one of Forbes' top 10 most elusive billionaires. They weren't mingling much. But Jonathan? He noticed me immediately. You seem to know how to handle chaos, he'd said that night, as I directed catering staff during a minor wine glass disaster. Marry me, and I'll make sure your life is less hectic, at least outside of galas. I laughed. But he was serious. Over the next few months, we were inseparable. Private jets. Yacht weekends. Late-night conversations. He said he wanted someone who grounded him, someone who wasn't dazzled by his world. I fit that bill. Until the prenup came. It arrived in a thick envelope, hand-delivered by a smiling paralegal from a firm I'd never heard of. Jonathan watched me carefully as I opened it. I hate this, he murmured, sitting beside me. But my father insisted. It's just protocol. Honestly, it doesn't change anything between us. I skimmed the clauses, everything about waiving rights to assets, companies, trust funds. There was a small, confusing clause about inheritance, but my brain glazed over it. I didn't care. I wasn't marrying him for money. So, I signed. He kissed me like I'd just saved him from something. I remember thinking it was strange, the way his shoulders relaxed the moment the pen hit the paper. I should have known. The day of David Mark's funeral was drenched in shadow and rain, fitting for the man who, even in death, could summon clouds. I stood quietly beside Jonathan at the front row of the marble-floored cathedral. The air was thick with silent judgment, designer perfume, and forced sorrow. His family, stiff, cold, and distant, treated me like an accessory rather than a grieving daughter-in-law. David's death had come suddenly, a stroke during his annual solo trip to the Swiss Alps. A man who built empires with one hand and destroyed competitors with the other, felled by his own heart. As we filed out, umbrellas forming a sea of black outside the towering gates, Jonathan was oddly quiet. His jaw was tight, eyes distant. I thought he was mourning. I was wrong again. 3 days later, we were summoned to the Mark estate for the wall reading. The atmosphere inside the study was tense, lined bookshelves, portraits of old patriarchs, and the faint scent of leather and old cigars. The estate attorney, Mr. Langford, cleared his throat and began reading. I sat beside Jonathan, clutching his hand. To my beloved son, Jonathan, I leave my collection of vintage Bentleys and the watchmaker's loft in Paris. That was it. I blinked, confused. To my grandchildren, I leave trust funds totaling $3 million each. Gasps rippled across the room. Langford paused, then adjusted his glasses. And to Amora Mark, my daughter-in-law, I leave the remaining 95% of my estate, including full ownership of Mark Innovations, all personal assets, and executive rights to the Mark Foundation. The room exploded. What the hell is this? Barked Gregory Mark, David's cousin. Is this a mistake? Snapped one of the board members seated behind us. Jonathan didn't say a word. He didn't even move. My heart pounded in my chest. I stared at Langford, certain he'd read it wrong. But no, he pointed to the clause, neatly printed and notarized. Mr. Mark updated his will 6 weeks before his death, Langford said calmly. He expressed deep admiration for Amora's integrity, intelligence, and vision for the future. He believed she was the only one capable of protecting the company and his legacy. I couldn't breathe. The silence that followed was darker than grief. The weight of that fortune fell squarely on my shoulders, and I suddenly realized every eye in the room had changed. I was no longer just the wife. I was the heir. And somewhere deep in that silence, I caught the flicker of something in Jonathan's eyes. Not shock. Not joy. But something colder. Calculation. The Mark mansion became a tomb after the will reading. Jonathan barely spoke to me the next day. When he did, it was mechanical, like he was choosing each word from a script. I'm happy for you, he said that evening over a glass of wine, his voice oddly flat. My father obviously admired you. You didn't know? I asked, still reeling. He shook his head. No. But I'm not surprised. You impressed him. But something in his tone made my skin prickle. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned beside him in the sprawling master suite, feeling like a guest in my own marriage. When I finally got up to get water, I passed his home office. He was inside. Door cracked. On a Zoom call. She signed the prenup, he was saying. She's protected under it, yes, but this changes things. We didn't expect him to pull this stunt. I need to move fast. I froze. I can still get control, he continued. She doesn't know the board's position. The vote's not public yet. I backed away slowly, heart hammering. He hadn't married me for love. He'd married me as part of a larger game. A move on the chessboard. And now that the pawn had become queen, he was trying to flip the board over. He had no idea what I had heard. But I had every intention of making sure he regretted everything. Over the next 2 weeks, I played dumb. Sweet. Loving. The naive, grateful wife. But privately, I summoned every legal mind, PR expert, and board advisor I could find. I wanted to understand exactly what David had left me, and what Jonathan thought he could take. Turns out, the board was split. Half supported my leadership. The other half didn't trust an outsider. So I changed the game. I showed up at the next shareholder meeting, not in pearls and a soft-spoken dress, but in a tailored black suit, hair slicked into a power bun, and a voice that didn't shake. I may not come from this world, I began, but David Mark trusted me with his empire. And if any of you still believe I'm just the girl Jonathan married, let me remind you, I now own the majority shares. I am not here for a seat at the table. I am the table. The room fell silent. One by one, those who doubted me realized I was not a woman to be trifled with. Especially not now. Jonathan's attempts to undermine me grew desperate. He tried to file a petition claiming undue influence over David. He tried to twist board members against me. But I stayed 10 steps ahead. I presented recordings. Emails. Documents David had written, praising me, grooming me for this role, preparing for the very possibility of betrayal from his own blood. Then I filed for divorce. The prenup he forced me to sign. Ironically airtight. He walked away with nothing. No stake. No power. No inheritance. No say. Just his last name, and even that would fade. People still whisper about the girl who married the billionaire's son, only to inherit the empire herself. Some call it luck. Some call it scandal. But those who know the truth, they call it strategy. I didn't set out to win a fortune. I just refused to lose myself. And in doing so, I became something no one expected. Unstoppable.